packages itself well. And if you package yourself well in the presentation of your objective, you have the capacity to win all those people. And if I can add one more element to that, my own view is that the sensitive social issues are going to come up again next time. There's no way you can avoid them, in my opinion. And that's an example of what I think Art was talking about, if I understand correctly what you're saying, is that that's an issue that you don't want to deal with. It's actually, in my view, it's not even yours to deal with. That's a public policy issue that if there were a professional, articulate organization with a spokesman who could explain the distinction between tolerance and acceptance and approval. Like, personally, I tolerate the NDP. I don't approve of them. I don't accept them. But I tolerate them. And in a free society, I have an obligation to tolerate all kinds of things. And therefore, I will tolerate people who advocate policies with which I disagree. And I'm not being reprehensible or objectionable in any way when I say that I don't approve of their policies. And this next election that rolls around, one of the things that I think should be part of your goal structure to deal with this and with what you're describing is you want another third-party organization out there that's going to deal with that issue and that is going to explain to the public what I just said, where we have an obligation to tolerate everybody. Everybody has civil rights. And we want civil rights for everybody. We want everybody to be tolerated. But just because you tolerate everybody doesn't mean that you agree with everything that everybody does. That's what a free society means. And my own view is that if you guys find yourself in a position 2 or 3 years from now where you have to carry the water bucket on that one, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for you to do it. And in that situation, you want to represent what people are already saying, not be the ones to plow around yourself. I don't know if you... I think if you do that right, the conservative element of the Conservative Party are going to look at it and say, oh, look at how well they're handling that. You know, that makes sense. So instead of fighting against something, you're actually promoting something. There's actually some literature circulating around, I could let you have, where people are actually thinking through how can you present these issues in a way where just about everybody, virtually everybody, would look at that and say, oh yeah, that's a good policy. Where you actually are defending civil rights instead of being seen as somebody that's trying to put the kibosh on something. I think you guys are really vulnerable there if you don't make that part of your goal structure.
Nice. If I can just comment on that, I'm sure that will be an issue in the next election. I am sure. It will be all over the country.
Kevin, actually in the last provincial election, the Conservative parties had the most side organizations they used that were funded by themselves. Like they spoke in debates in the media about having the supports of the cities and you know, the MLAs used it of the councillors and the school boards, which were provincially funded organizations that of course supported the government, and they used that a lot. And it was power for them. But it was actually a provincially funded system. They were, you know, it's kind of wrong, you know, it's a roundabout way, you know, it is. Like everywhere in our riding, our MLA went, you always had an MD councillor or mayor or somebody hanging on the shoulder. Well, what's that doing? It's sending a message.
I would still come back to the idea that you need a schematic. Like if you don't, going into the election, if you don't have a schematic, or even when you look at building a party over a period of 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, if you don't have a schematic, you're left with no choice but to react to whatever's happening on the news that morning. Like, you have no other options. That's what you've got. If you don't have a schematic, even in terms of presentation of policies, you're going to be left, or presentation of your objective rather, you're going to be left to try to fight it out on policy. And as odd as it sounds, I don't think you want to fight some aspects of an election on policy. You really don't. You're better off to fight it on communication and the presentation of communication and the location. And there's a lot of groundwork that you can do before an election. I would take the position, and I would argue, that actually the outcome of a 28-day election is actually a consequence of what happens about 24, 30 months ahead of that. You know, it's like farming. When you go out there and see a harvest in the fall, that just didn't happen in 48 hours. You know, there are fields that are very clean over a long period of time, and there's a lot of seeds that can be sown, and ideas and friendships, and one of the reasons that your MLA could get as far as he could on some of that stuff is that he would feed somebody a story that wasn't completely precise in its perspective, perhaps, but the person he was talking to didn't have any other basis to measure the credibility of what he's being told because you didn't give it to him. And I'm not, you know, criticizing you or talking about you specifically, but
Stephen Carter uses the term miss. You start miss about those.
yeah.
Sam, could I?
I think Art had a comment or question, and then, Dan.
Yes, I've watched quite closely the last election in the U.S. and the influence of the Tea Party. They chose down there not to have another party created, obviously. They stuck with what they had as far as the conservative side of it was concerned. And they influenced the political behavior and environment within that party. And of course, it almost divided, well, it is divided inside that Republican Party. But the outside influence on the politicians are directing policy in a very real way. Well, I don't know how it's all going to translate over time, but you know, the reformers were actually in that same kind of a role at one time. I thought the Wildrose was kind of heading off in that direction too, but there's still the big push behind the Republicans with the Tea Party. Let's get those conservative guys in there that are going to follow what, you know, some of the conservative principles that have been laid out by the Tea Party, and they fight within. Well, they have that knockdown, drag 'em out type fight within their caucus to get some stability within it and move off in that direction. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily always the way, but the Tea Party has great influence, though, what's going on inside the Republican caucus. Are we anywhere close to doing something like that with the Wildrose? Is there that movement, you know, outside just the political, you know, the political established group? Is there a grassroots, you know, movement of some kind or push?
I'm not qualified to comment on that.
I would submit to you that there's a window of opportunity for something like that to happen, Art, but people have to stand up to the plate. People that are interested in defending freedom now, it's an opportunity now to do that.
Jim? Dan, you have a question?
A couple of comments, yes. There was an email going around from a fellow from the Czech Republic after the American election, and he said, America's problem isn't that they elected a fool for a president. America's problem is that they had enough fools to elect a fool. And quite frankly, I think that's the challenge that we have here in Alberta. It's not that we have a fool for a premier, it's that we had enough fools to elect a fool. And the challenge for us, and I would say us as constituents, as people from Alberta, not the Wildrose Party, but as a third party group. And Kevin and I did some work in the last year to try and create a third party group. But our challenge is to try and educate people so that just like the landowners group did, so when push came to shove, they didn't get bluffed away from the position, they didn't get bluffed away from their values. And one of the most astute things that Ralph Klein ever said was, and everybody sort of laughed at him when he said it, but he said, show me a big enough parade, I'd be happy to lead it. But quite frankly, that's what the Wildrose needs to try and do, is they need to try and create a parade. And you talked about this a while ago, Kevin. Basically, you have to do it with allies, not a formal allegiance, but you need allies, or the Wildrose Party needs allies that are creating the parade. And when election time comes along, then they can say, yes, that's what we would do. And we're at quite a difficulty because we've had 100 years of the left convincing people that the more you care, the more you're prepared to mortgage your children's and your grandchildren's future, to buy something for voters today that your grandchildren will have to pay for. And it's hard to campaign against that, because you seem like, if you do it as a party, you seem like you're a hard-hearted, SOB who doesn't care about, the time being. So to me, the challenge is for all of us to get some groups going to try and create this movement to plow the ground out in front of these issues, so when the time comes, the Wildrose can step in. And I'll just say one more quick thing. When things went to hell for Dix in BC, I see a commentator on the Sun News saying, like, in politics, when you're explaining, you're going backwards. And quite frankly, when we had our Wildrose had our health weight guarantees, everybody said, yeah, I've been saying for years I wanted that. And quite frankly, was the Fraser Institute and Dean, whatever his name, Ishmael, had been talking about that for 4 or 5 years. He'd made it clear to them, like everybody understood, yeah, that's what we want. To me, our Danielle Bucks were a bright idea that, we all, like the second we announced it, we were explaining, and quite frankly, we were going backwards. You know what I mean? It may well be a wonderful idea, but it should have been, somebody, like a third-party group should have been plowing the ground. And like, as you know, like Kevin and Keith, the bulk of the places where we won, Kevin and Keith had spent literally, hundreds of public meetings and thousands of hours on the radio, and the people understood those issues, so we didn't lose them over, global warming. So I think the challenge for the Wildrose is to see that they help some third-party groups sort of get these messages out, start creating the dialogue, sort of at a distance from the party. And so, anyway, we have lots to do, I'm sure.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I said earlier, and I don't know if people heard me or not, but I think one of the goals you have to figure out how to bypass the media. Like, if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to deliver your message as crisply and as cleanly and as pointedly as you need to. You have to bypass the media. And if you can't do that, then you're going to be in a position where you're going to be forced to rely on the media to deliver your message. And you don't want that. You don't want to go there. And there are a couple of other considerations. One is that if you look at the economy over the last decade, especially 2 decades or 3 decades, but most of the major businesses that are on the horizon today that are major employers and major players in the economy, many of them didn't exist 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I mean, when I was a kid, who ever heard of Microsoft or Apple or, I'm going back a ways now, but there are all kinds of players who are major companies. And it's the same thing in public policy, is that in the same way that there are opportunities in the market, there are opportunities within the process of affecting change in a society. There's all kinds of them. And there are opportunities to bypass the media that a lot of people have never thought of, because they keep thinking in terms of a war of ideas, of a policy battle. So they don't even entertain the notion that we need to bypass this. Let me throw out one idea if I can. One of the things that my own view is that you guys as a party should be thinking about is you should set up your own radio programs. Like, it wouldn't be hard for you to take 4 or 5 or 6 MLAs and put them on a panel every week. The technology to put together a radio program now is so cheap. Nobody even has to go anywhere. You can buy a $100 mic or $150 mic and hook it up to your laptop, and you've got studio quality sound. And all you need to do is hook up on a conference call with somebody as a moderator. You can talk for 2 hours or 3 hours about any subject you want. And then you can edit that. There's technology and software that you can buy for $100 now, where you could take that 2-hour program and you could shoot it down. You can cut 1 word out of a sentence if you want. And you could produce a program every week for 30 minutes or 60 minutes. You could call it Wildrose Radio or Alberta Today, or call it whatever you want. And you could provide a training forum for MLAs in order to address policies. Because you're dealing with your own media outlet, you can edit anything you want out of there. You can splice anything in that you want. After you've listened to it, you can say, do you really want to use that word? Or you could have a conference call with these people on a regular basis, so you're training them with how to use media and how to be effective with it. If you started that 2 years before the next provincial election, what it would cost to get on a half a dozen stations throughout the province, it's just minuscule. Like, how cheap it is just, it's incredible. Production and stuff like that, because you have to pay people to do it and stuff, and you need the right, you need somebody who has the right understanding of the tone you want to present. But over a period of 2 years, you could actually air hundreds of hours of programs where there are people who would begin to tune into this and just to see what Drew Barnes has to say today, or what Strachan got to say about such and such. And you can start using themes on your radio program every week. You can go on the radio, you could talk, you could even introduce it, you know, the purpose of our party, our objective is this, and you could frame it in terms, you know, we want a better province for all people so that we can blah, 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 blah. I mean, I would talk about self-respect. You could do a whole program about the morality, well, no, you don't really use that word. The responsibility associated with individual actions. Like there's if you remove people from the consequences of their own actions, you're going to fill the world with fools. And you could actually take that theme and you could do programs on single themes. But my point is that the exposure that you could get, like in your riding or something over 2 years, Drew, you could be on the radio for an hour every week for the next year. And the cost to do that is it's not significant. You could pick up some of these smaller stations for, I bet you,
200 a week, 250 a week.
yeah, if you went long-term on contracts, you could pick up some of these better stations with 50,000 watts. I bet you for less than $15,000 a year.
Yeah, that'd be significant. The exposure would be great.
It would be fabulous. And then you can frame your own argument. The other thing you can do is you can actually splice 10 and 15 minute or even 5-minute audio tracks out of the 30-minute program. And you can match it. Microsoft now has a program called, I forget what it's called, but you can take a 5-minute audio track out of the radio program, like say you saying something for 5 minutes, and you could actually splice in 100 still photos so that you could actually sit and watch a video flipping through still photos, so the photo pops up, like when you're talking about a bridge or an overpass or hospital or something, it flips up. And people could sit and watch the video and listen to Drew Barnes talking about some issue. That kind of technology is there. It's cheap. It's cheap. That's one example. That's just one. There are others. That's one example how you could bypass the media.
And during the election, the last election, sorry,
Go ahead.
while Keith Wilson went on the radio, he educated rural Alberta. He came to meetings, we became groupies and followed him around because we were so interested in the subject. We gave money. And I think you're right. I think that you have to start early and you could do it. And I think we have to go towards the urban population because you've had the rural population. You've got to hold that rural population. There are things happening that you still have to take care of those people, but we do have to address the urbanite who's having a little different problems than we are in rural.
Yeah. If I can just respond to that, I think the thing you want to think about is that your objective is not to win the next election, it's to change the paradigm. If you change the paradigm with the way people see you, win the election. If you don't change the paradigm, you're not going to win the election. Like that, it's that simple. And even if you squeak through the way the NDP did in Quebec and you win a bunch of seats short term, you're still going to face the same problems again next time. So if you don't change the paradigm on some of this stuff, where you get elected and you end up in a situation like Ralph Klein was, where he either had to cut spending or they'd have thrown him out of there. I think that's what you want.
Kevin, should we be thinking to totally bypass the media or learn how to use it? Because what we've found is that they're basically lazy. And it's our ability to write our own stuff and let the media pick it up, or write our own letters, write our own press releases, and they just take them and slide them right on to their editorial or on their page and use it the way you wrote it because they don't have time or the ability to rewrite it. They may respond to it, but they'll take your stuff and just print it.
Yeah, don't misunderstand me. I would never suggest that you don't have a good relationship with the media or, endeavor to have that. You should. And if I would make any comment about your press releases, I think that that you may want to consider having someone come in and study or examine or critique the tone of your press releases. Like most policy people, when they think in terms of policy, they think if they issue press releases about policy, that's what they should be doing. But in a lot of cases, you shouldn't. In a lot of cases, instead of a press release starting out that, you know, the Wildrose party today said such and such, the press release should really actually start out and say, you know, Sally Jones is a 17-year-old farm kid whose home is, you know, 2 miles north of such and such at the end of a windy lane that's got blank along the sides of the lane. You know, on Tuesday, she found out that such and such is the case, and it's going to affect her by such and such. And you actually tell a story instead of, and then at the end of your press release, put it in a press release, I'm quite serious. Then at the end of the press release, then you state appropriately what you have to say as a critic of a particular policy issue or what you think should occur. If you start going that angle, you will find that the level of pickup that you have from the press is going to be much, much higher. The small town stuff will pick up some of that easy stuff, but the big dailies and the big media, they won't pick up stuff like that. But if you start writing stories and explaining what you're talking about in terms of how it affects Joe and Sally and Harry, you'll get far more traction.
Yeah, because that's what when I talk about that's what I learned as a commodity organization. You know, we were writing this stuff.
Yeah.
And we weren't writing it as the Conservative Party. We were writing it as the commodity organization. And then the government would pick it up and say, here we have, you know, X support, or this is what barley growers said, this is what they want done, this is what we're going to do. So it's developing the relationship between us and the media, us and the government, and them using us to get the policy position put forward so that they can come forward.
Sure.
One more thing I would add, it's that the purpose of a press release, in my view, is not to tell anybody what your policy is or your opinion is. That's not the purpose. The purpose of a press release is to persuade you.
Or explain it.
To persuade. And if the explanation facilitates the persuasion, that's good. But the objective of a press release is not to tell somebody what you think. The objective of a press release is to persuade the person on the receiving end that they should be thinking like you think. That's the purpose of the press release. It's not to tell people what your policy is. The truth is that probably half the people that get your press releases, they don't care what your policy is. They don't actually care.
One other question about your, kind of the overriding on everything else is the vision that you want for the product.
Yep.
And so how specific do you make that? You don't want to make it too broad, but you want to have something that you can point to so that every other policy, every other initiative points to that. So do you make it definable, like, you know, we want X number of, you know, total employment, or we want, you know, we use words like the best or the most successful, or kind of a softer target that you're still a focus point, but not an absolute number.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. You're making a very good distinction. I think that the examples we looked at were like Toyota to build cars that people everywhere would love to drive. What you want is you want a declaration of your objective or purpose where the person hearing it, even if they're your political opponent, has to look at it, admire it, and go, boy, that makes my heart feel good.
Yeah.
And when we set up the taxpayers, I don't know who made the decision to amend it, but our original mission statement there was to promote the responsible and efficient use of tax dollars and carry out an educational role with respect to wealth creation and responsible public policy. It's an apple pie kind of thing. And I think that's what you want. The question you ask yourself is, what do you want Alberta to look like? And you don't answer that with policies. Policy, how you build a car and the reason you build a car are different. How you farm and the reason you farm are two different things. Or how you ranch, maybe. I don't know much about ranching. But I would suggest that you think about, like, your party's going to have to do this, but you come up with a statement that actually explains, you know, we want to see a province, we want Alberta to be competitive, self-sufficient Albertans, self-sufficient citizens, functioning in an environment of self-respect and, I mean, I'm just rambling on here, but you get the point. You don't want specific goals related to policies in that objective statement, none. What you want is you want to be able to say that our objective as a party is this, and you want everybody to think apple pie and whipped cream.
Yeah, today's buzzword is sustainable.
Yeah, let's not
I would
use that
stay
one.
away from that word, and the reason is it doesn't mean anything to anybody. Like everybody goes, gee, that's a nice word. Nobody knows what it means.
And you don't want to put a target on it either.
Well, it's actually a left-wing word. If you look at the sustainable movement and what that movement actually is, and who's behind it and what they actually want, my sense is a lot of people in this room don't want to go there. The left has done a marvelous job over the last decades of taking a word and actually changing what it means. The left has even taken some concepts that people historically on the right admired and have succeeded in persuading people that they can get that by supporting this. It's so subtle how some of this has worked out, that, but it's what's happening. And,
But thank you. I think we need to cut it off here.
We do, yeah.
And thank you very much, Kevin, for coming and sharing with us.
Yeah.